Welcome to day 21. Thanks for joining me again on the Screenwriter's Journey. We left off with Larry and Lexi in the trampoline place. As you see, I just saved the new date. I should look and see what that date is to know how long it's been since I was working on it. Anyways, Larry has just found out that the Salerno crime family is a part of what's going on, and obviously it's a fictitious crime family, but in their world it's real enough that Larry understands who they are, as he says, rich and ruthless. And even though Lexi isn't telling him, he is adding things up pretty quickly, so much so that he says, your mom, you are part of it. And Lexi is confirming that. And now we're jumping around. Okay. Gosh, it's so funny how I think of things when I'm writing and then I jump back and make some kind of change. So now they sort of know. I mean, Lexi obviously knows more than Larry, but Larry is catching up quick. But they're still speculating as to what exactly is going on. How does Rachel, a.k.a. Lexi's mom, fit into all of this? And so I think, I don't know, when you speculate like that, sometimes you can get away with dialogue that you normally wouldn't if it was just back and forth. Again, like I always say, like a police procedural. But when they're speculating and guessing, you can still get that information across, but it doesn't seem so, I guess, staged or stinted or whatever. Having said that, it's also a good way for the screenwriter to work out some plot details on the page and then go back and figure out a better way to give this information out, which is always, I mean, it's not just having two people sit down and eat food and do something, or walking on a sidewalk and just talking. It's having something visually interesting going on. So yeah, that's an ongoing struggle, getting out information in a unique sort of way, especially exposition, that you're just trying to avoid the on the nose stuff. So here I am playing with the best way to get this out. It's usually kind of the quickest way, because rarely do you say, wow, that scene's not long enough, I need to add another half page of dialogue or something. So it's the old get in as late as possible, get out as soon as possible. But the first, and I know this isn't even the first time through the scene, I don't think, you're still experimenting, you're still writing, you're still getting the character voices. Because sometimes, even though you've got the plot laid out, and you know it's going to happen, the characters start talking, they start coming alive to a certain extent, and it's like, oh, the story's going a different direction. And so this, you look at this, okay, but how does that tie into this? What if she made another deal? With who? As I've said before, and I'm not the first, having questions, and a question can answer another question, but it can also keep the pace moving, and keep the scene moving, keep the action moving. So at the top of 50, Larry is, I mean, not super on the nose, but saying what is going to be needed to drive the story ahead. And now Larry is talking about Area 51 and JFK. Spoiler alert, I don't think that's going to make it into the next draft. We'll see. What am I doing here? So Lexi is giving out her theory, and so the question is, when has she had time to come up with this theory? Because she just found out I don't know exactly know when. I'd have to go back and look. When did she find out? well, she knew about her mom to some extent. So, I mean, she's had half a day or something to come up with some sort of a theory of what's going on. And we already know that Salerno and Rachel have promised her jewelry, clothes, whatever. So now Lexi's had some more time to formulate what she thinks her mom might be doing, which is basically trying to buy her love or buy her respect or something. So, I mean, we could just have Paul or this FBI guy or Holly just sitting there and rattling off this information, like they do on, again, police procedurals where 5 or 4 people sit around either a whiteboard or a bunch of computers and they just basically rattle off all these facts to each other. And then that sets up the story. But if you have someone who doesn't 100% know for sure what's going on do it, I think that makes it a little more plausible. And again, some of this is just me getting out the logic on paper, because even though you work out the plot in an outline, unless you do a super detailed outline, which I typically don't, at some point the rubber's got to meet the road, so to speak. And so that's what I'm doing here. And the beauty about this is if it works, you've got the shell of a scene. If it doesn't work, then you go, it doesn't work. I didn't think of that before. And so sometimes you go back and rewrite that scene. Sometimes it will lead you back 5 pages, 10 pages. I had a recent script called Ripple, which is totally awesome. If you want to read it, let me know and I'll send you a copy. That literally while writing, I think the log line after, it was either the log line or the treatment, it led me back to the first page to make a substantial change that I think really helped the script that I had just been missing. It was crazy. Getting back to this script, so Lexi and Larry are sort of getting deep into the weeds here. And Larry says that on page 50, right at the top there, the love of his life is. And then he realizes he said too much, and we go to girlfriend, and now Lexi is pressing him. He used those words when he was planning on telling me. So Gary has this ulterior motive for the weekend to really tell Lexi, even though he's only 20 and she's 18, that he really, whatever. Don't know about the L word. So will that make it into the next draft? Interesting. We'll see. And part of this was to get that idea of the twins ESP, which is kind of the infamous thing. Are they able to not literally communicate, but sort of know each other's thinking? And I wanted to drop that in just in case it comes in useful later on. So that was a little distraction. Sorry, in terms of that twins ESP, which was really, I mean, that was important, but the idea that Gary is serious about her, but ironically didn't stand up and grow a pair and go with her to go meet her mom, even though, of course, at the time he didn't really think it was dangerous, but maybe he was worried. I don't know. Let's see. Am I going to delete all this? Boom. Now, this this is going back to the idea of one twin gets the optimistic genes, the other one gets the cocky genes or something. And I played with this because I didn't... Because Gary hasn't... Well, I guess he's sort of come off as cocky. What do you think? Leave a comment. Subscribe and like. Check out my movie, The Key, on Amazon Prime. I always have to get a plug-in for that. So then when I said the cocky genes, I'm trying to figure out what exactly that means. And as they're discussing it here, cocky isn't the same as brave. So I'm just playing with his dialogue to see if it makes sense, both for the story, for the characters, etc., etc. And then I find it interesting as the father of identical twins, who are recently on an episode of Dave, season 2, episode 4, if you want to check it out, with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is in the episode. Where was I? Identical twins. So, there's the question of, because they look alike, how much alike are they? As they grow, obviously their personalities are different. And so that's kind of what I'm exploring a little bit with Larry and Gary. Okay, so this was a big thing. He's changed mostly for the better. Why do you say that? His taste in women. So that's a pretty bold statement for Larry to make, because it has, as you can imagine, a double meaning. I wonder if that will make it through to the next draft. I know I really liked it when I first wrote it. All right, now what in the world? Looks like I'm jumping around. Okay, so I'm trying to... You could use your twins ESP. That's not really a thing. So that scene sort of ends. And so now we're on page 50. And again, as I've said in a previous episode or two, I'm thinking this is going to be 110 pages, 105 pages. So we're getting pretty near the midpoint, which, according to Save the Cat, is a false victory or false defeat. What's it going to be? I don't know. We'll have to see. And am I getting close to halfway through the script? Okay, so at this point, of course, Abby and Gary are going with Holly. And I mentioned, I think, in yesterday's episode, Holly has a reason to bring them. And I am curious to know if anyone knows what that is, if it's super obvious, if it's not obvious, or what. So, Gary's nervous. I think Abby's sort of nervous excitement. Holly, we don't really know for sure what she's up to. She's looking at her laptop. Is she looking at some sort of intel, some data? Is she looking at her next assignment in Miami to kill time? And as you can see by how slow I'm going here in the writing, I am obviously a little stumped. Oh, all right. So Gary makes that sort of leap in thinking and logic, realizing that if she's not trying to figure out what they're going to do, that, oh my gosh, she's studying up for her next assignment. And then that leads Abby to say, wonder about it. And then here's a line for Gary. I'll just let it speak for itself. I'm just thinking of, like, Snakes on a Plane, or that Prison with Vin Diesel or something, where something goes horribly wrong. I always struggle with, bringing up a not self, but a referential, like, the movies or on a TV show, when obviously that's what this is, one or the other. But for now, I think it's just a little bit of humor. It does show something. There is a reason for it. And so hopefully I can get away with that. We'll see if it makes it. Okay, now Abby's going off on a totally different tangent. And the reason that she thought of this is she's thinking of Holly's new assignment, and then that leads her mind back to her current or past assignment, which of course was 14 years or whatever, with watching after Lexi. And now, as you see, Gary is piling on. you've got to have conflict. You've always got to have conflict, hopefully not contrived. And so Gary goes, of course, too far when he says, your father not so much. And then when Holly says that he's dead, that really makes Gary feel bad, like I wrote. Then I offers Holly a nodding apology. And I guess when I first wrote that, I thought I knew what I was visualizing, but it's more like an understanding. I don't know what it is. Paul is kind of like uncle. So that's a little bit on the nose. You saw that dialogue that Abby had comparing Paul and Holly to Holly and Lexi. We'll see if that makes it. So now, as you see, I'm kind of struggling with this scene. But Gary, after kind of, not really coming down super hard on her in this scene because I've gone back, but they've had a little back and forth, and now he's sort of starting to lay it on thick. Yeah, I still have that nodding apology in there. So Abby's got this postulation, I'll say, and Holly kind of dismisses it. And then Gary compares if Paul found out that something happened to Holly, just like if something happened to Lexi, then you would feel bad. And then there's Abby, who tries to put a silver lining on things, but Gary can see from Holly's expression that she's not totally as sure as Abby is. That's what I was afraid of, but not the only thing. Oh. So Holly is turning that back on Gary. I don't love this dialogue right here, I must say. Sometimes, as I've mentioned, and I'm not the only one, you put in placeholder filler dialogue because you know what sort of has to be said, but you don't know how to say it right then. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But you can sit there and diddle and dawdle for 5, 10, 15 minutes, which I've been known to do. But at some point, you just got to move on knowing that you're going to come back and fix it. Because that's just the way it goes. And I had talked a couple episodes ago about typing. And I literally still, it just is creepy. Or I don't know what it is to think my early scripts that I actually typed on a typewriter, you would write the dialogue and that's it. I mean, gosh, it's just crazy. All right. Oh. I don't know if I'm cutting and pasting here. I'm jumping all over the place. So that scene ends with Holly reminding them that once they get there, they basically can't say or do anything. All right, so now, here we go. We're on page, 51-ish, 52. Rachel comes in after being gone for, 10, 15 screen minutes. She's back. And naturally, they're going to wonder where she is. Where she's been. Is she in on this? What the heck is going on? He can talk. Oh, that's the first time Larry said something since Rachel has been around. So Rachel, not wanting to get into everything, kind of gives him that lightly veiled threat. You behave and you'll be fine. All right, so this was a big thing when I first wrote this, and maybe I rewrote it, maybe I didn't. Vic Salerno actually shows up at this place with his security guards. So I'm trying to think, because this, I think in my outline, this is the way I had it happening. Well, maybe not, because the outline kind of changed and morphed. But he shows up and they go through all this stuff about, trying to buy her love, basically. And then we bring out the fact that he says Grandpa Vic isn't getting any younger. And this is when Lexi finds out. Boom. So look at that. We're halfway through the script, and that, I would say, is a major bombshell. Is that a false victory? It probably is for Rachel. It's a false defeat, although it seems like a very real one, to Lexi. So I don't know if this is going to stick, but that is a pretty big... I mean, that makes sense. That's sort of a halfway point, would you say, to the script, to the story. But going back to the idea of Salerno actually being there, and I'll probably talk about this more when we find out what happened. Spoiler alert. I think at some point I realized, would this guy really show up if he had any inkling that the FBI might be surveilling the place? But maybe he has no inkling because he hasn't read anything that Rachel said that is like a giveaway. So anyways, they're going through the part about the DNA testing, and then when we know for sure, then, you're going to go with me and live happily ever after as Mrs. Crime Boss, or, granddaughter crime boss. So now Rachel's trying to justify this by explaining that as she was getting close to being paroled, let out of jail, whatever, she was wondering how I can make this up to you. And I love that line of Lexi's, "Trust me, you can't." And I wonder if that survived through the next draft. Comment below. Take your guess. So, yeah, and so it's a turn of phrase from her, and then Salerno immediately turns it back and says, "Well, your grandpa can." But then Lexi turns it back on him and says that her mom's testimony basically put your son away, and we don't really know how he died, but he's dead. He died in prison somehow. Salerno is explaining that he basically, in not so many words, that he didn't think he could ever forgive her, but that was before he knew who Lexi is, or Lexi might be. And then we find out that the two of them have been planning this just for 4 days. It's been a busy 4 days. Twisted some arms, broke a few more. Some of this, I guess you write it and you go, "Oh, that's super clever. It might get a laugh." And that's something a crime boss would say. And then you start thinking, well, is it used before? Am I subconsciously stealing it, borrowing it? Or do I not know that it was said, but people who watch this are all going to know and they're going to groan? So that's definitely a double-edged sword when you come up with something you assume is clever dialogue and maybe unique. I'm sure it's been used before, but... So now Lexi's starting to get the picture here that if I go with you, all that stuff you said, the jewelry, the cars, the vacations, whatever, it's all mine. But she starts her sentence with "if," and Salerno makes it clear there is no if, a.k.a. making her an offer she can't refuse, which, trust me, I thought many times about using that old cliche, and hopefully I didn't. And so Lexi looks at her mom and is like, "What?" And now here's a double bombshell. Larry finds out that he's got to go with Lexi too, because obviously Salerno is not going to let him go, and squealed everyone about what happened here. And so, which is why I hope you truly care for her. And Larry is like, He has to nod. He can't say he doesn't because he thinks maybe Salerno will have him popped or something. So Salerno makes his big debut, talk for a couple pages, and then makes it clear that the DNA test is going to come back. So that's kind of a ticking clock. There you go. And now she says, what if I'm not? Salerno, it almost like the thought of that just, it doesn't creep him out. It's like, oh my gosh. So of course he looks at Rachel and delivers that line, which would probably come out like, well, I'm not going to do some voice, but you can imagine how that would sound. And then he brightens, let's not even think that way. So he's basically saying if Rachel lied to him or is wrong about this, she's going to be in deep doo-doo, and who knows what's going to happen to Lexi and Larry. Okay, so then they leave. All right, so yeah, we're more than halfway through. So what happens next is bad guys close in, right? According to Save the Cat, which you could argue when Salerno shows up, that is the bad guys closing in. So it's a 2-for-1 deal. All right. So they've arrived at this airstrip or airport or whatever it is, and we're setting up. I wonder if this might be stuff I haven't written yet. Because I know at some point I went back and was like rewriting all this stuff, but I think this might be all new. So what I was thinking about here, I kind of distinctly remember that, is that this Noble guy who is an FBI guy is very matter of fact, to the point. He doesn't want Holly to be here. Paul has kind of talked him into letting her come because she would have some inside, maybe psychological knowledge about Lexi that could help, and she's experienced, and more bodies on the ground, the better. I think that was my rationale. But somehow they have that line, get in. I thought that was a good way to kind of say who he is and also move the scene along. They're not going to sit out there and talk forever. So he just says, get in. All right. And so in this version, not that it's going to change, spoiler alert, obviously Paul knows that Gary and Abby are coming, and he has told Noble, and Noble says, I thought he was pulling my leg. And all right, so now Holly is pulling him aside, and we're not hearing what they say. So I thought it would be kind of fun if Gary and Abby are kind of guessing or thinking what they're talking about. But whatever they were talking about, Noble glances over at the kids, and he glances over again, and then he looks at the kids and he says, get in. So they don't really know what to think. Obviously, Holly's told him something that has convinced him that they should be there. And again, this is part of the reason that she wanted them to come. But I don't think it would be no fun to come right out and say it. I think it would be kind of cool, if the audience knew, or they could put it together, maybe with a few pieces that I'm laying out here. All right, so there ends day 21. That was a pretty big day. I think it was right about 30 minutes on the dot. So that's like 2.5 hours. Yeah, 2.5 hours of writing. So a big day. I don't know. It would be interesting to go back and see, not on this script, but on any script, what's the longest I had ever worked on a script. This is a really good way to log your time, because literally I open the script, I start the screen recorder, and so when I'm done, I could go back and see how many hours I spent on this script. That would be in front of the computer, obviously. Super interesting. But I digress. Thanks again for tuning in. And let's see what happens on day 22, shall we? I'll see you then. Until then, do some writing yourself.